exploring all sorts of stuff about who the Lord is, and we all bring our own perspective to it. And we got 6 guys in the group, and we want to have 10 guys in the group. And if anyone wants to try a men's group, a leader impact group, if you've never tried one, or if you've tried one before and it didn't work out for you, then you might want to try one again. And that's where I met Paul. And so Paul Craig joined our group, and he had a few little health issues, or big health issues, and so being in our group, we're all praying for him. We're all on Paul's team, right? And so it's my honor to introduce him, to tell you this story today. And but if anyone wants to hear any more about Leader Impact, Craig's in the group, Ron's in the group, Ian's in our group, Grant's in our group, and if you've never been in one, give it a try. And if you have and it didn't work, try us again. Just different groups, different messages, and it's all about Jesus Christ, right? So, Paul,
without further ado,
yeah, here we go.
So just so you know, I volunteered to do this. You didn't have to be locked into it. But probably was asked to do this maybe 3 years ago, and I declined. I just didn't know what I was going to say. Last night at 10 o'clock, I didn't know what I was going to say. I actually typed this out in 2 this morning. And but I'm hoping it's a good little story. So I grew up in this area. I grew up one street over on Balsam Drive, which is now Millionaires Row. And when I lived there was actually 4 farms on Balsam Drive. And at the top of the intersection, there's a McDonald Road. There was 2 farms on McDonald Road. So nobody had, well, maybe a couple people had money, but not us anyway. I grew up very poor. We wore hand-me-down clothes. We had to buy our groceries on Monday because they were slightly stale and getting cheaper. And I grew up with my mom and dad and my 2 brothers. And my dad worked at a factory that's now torn down. It was by the railway tracks. He loaded trucks his whole life. And my mother stayed at home and looked after us. I wanted to mention, if you drive down some of these streets, you see very, very tall spruce trees along the road. And they were actually planted to keep the wind from blowing the fruit off of the fruit trees. So, a little interesting tidbit. And Oakville is a very sleepy town. Mothers would push their baby buggies to the Loblaw store downtown Oakville and leave us little children in the baby buggy while they did their shopping. And there were so many kids, nobody would steal a kid, right? It was just like all sorts of children out there. And anyway, I wanted to start my story off much like the way I started my mother's funeral story off. In 1912, my great-grandfather moved from England to a little town called Picton, which is in the Prince Edward County. And, government gave him 70 acres of land, and he started to farm and put down roots. World War I came right away, and my uncle, who was old enough, my grandfather, who was old enough, went to war. Promptly got his leg blown off, and sent back here. Didn't deter him at all. He drove a car, he had a house, and he worked full time. And it wasn't until he was diagnosed with cancer that he had to move to a cheap area to live, and he chose Boston Drive. And bought like 4 acres on Boston Drive for almost nothing, and lived out his life on that street. And my grandfather was buried great-grandfather, is buried in Picton. We went to the graveyard, and on the tombstone it's written, his name, whatnot, but he was the Sunday school superintendent for over 60 years. And I'm like, wow, that's unheard in today's generation. But what a great spiritual legacy that he left behind for us, and also to his son, who bore the same name as Ernest, who was my grandfather. And I never met either my grandfather or my great-grandfather, because they just passed away before I was born. But there was something that lingered spiritually in our family. And anyway, as a child, I gotta tell you about this little thing. So we narrowed my mom's apartment to one suitcase, and it was been in my basement for a few years. And I went through it yesterday to find some pictures of myself as a child. And this was the only one I could find. So this is the actual card of my birth announcement, April 22nd, 1958. And I remember some kid back that my mom was super angry with me, like in her 90s, so you have to cut your mother slack. And she phoned me up and she's like, just so you know, I threw out every childhood picture of you. And I thought she was like angry at me. But at the same time, I'm like, nobody would do that. But evidently, I have no childhood pictures. I have no. But it's okay. I'm not going to hold a grudge. I was my mom's caregiver for 33 years. And sometimes she needed a lot of care, sometimes she needed a lot of care. But, you know, during 33 years, you're going to have a couple of spots. So you don't get along with each other. And anyway, that I have no childhood pictures like Jim had. But anyway, that's okay. One thing I learned about living in a house with no money was how to work. So I had a morning paper route and an afternoon paper route. I had leaf raking jobs, grass cutting jobs, and snow shoveling jobs. So I was always working, making cash, and kind of stuck with me. And it was a good work ethic. And as I was pondering my life, I have been for the last few days trying to think of what to say here. There's been four things have influenced me. So one was my family, and one was my friends, and thirdly was co-workers, and fourthly was the church. And believe it or not, this was my church in the 60s. And you can hardly see it, but if you look on the ceiling over there, you'll see two little diagonal strips that come out on the ceiling that's not been painted properly. So the stage of the church used to be there, and the church used to be here, and the preacher would preach there. And then they built twice. They've added on to this church here. But I went here as a child. You know, in 1963 I started coming here, and as I mentioned, there was tremendous spiritual foundation laid by my great-grandfather and my grandfather. And I went to church every Sunday, and this church used to be called Winnett Memorial Church. And they had Winnett Workshop, which is a youth group for boys, in the basement on Wednesdays. And I would come here, we would do woodworking projects on a very dangerous saw. Terrifying. And we would like make wallets. It's kind of like camp sort of. And it was fun. We would come here. And I was thinking how strong was my faith back when I was a child. And actually it was quite strong, because one day in grade 8, I went to New Central School over here. My friend Donald Sidney came up to me, and I had previously stolen Donald's girlfriend away from him. Her name was Elaine. And he said, if you don't break up with Elaine, I'm going to tell our Sunday school teachers that you had your eyes open during prayer. was horrified of this. So I promptly broke off with doing it. So that was in grade 8. And for whatever reason, in grade 9, I was talked into going to a trade high school, which was not the nearby high school. I had to take a bus to this trade high school. And I had a completely different set of friends. There was like 11 people in the bus that came with me, but sort of didn't hang out with those guys. So I graduated to a new group of friends. In these new group of friends, I developed new behaviors and new habits. And most of these habits I am not going to go into, so I'm not too proud of them. And at the same token, I put my faith on hold and kind of lived the wild life, and I'll leave it at that. So in my teenage years, I would have to say that my friends had a negative effect on me. I had a variety of jobs as a young man. I worked in a car wash for a wonderful man who paid me $1.85 an hour. And one day when it was so cold, as we were wiping the cars off as they're coming out of the car wash, ice was forming on our rags. And he offered to buy us coffee and donuts. And then I still have it. My next pay stub, deduction. 25 cents for the coffee and 20 cents for the donut. One day I will have it framed. So, but he gave me the job with no interview. He's like, "You're hired." And I lied to him. I told him I had a driver's license. I never drove a car in my life. And all of a sudden I'm driving Lincolns, right? And I have to drive them in. Fortunately, I never crashed. My uncle saw me struggling. This is my grandfather's son, whose also name was Ernest, good name. He got me a job with the federal government, and I was servicing trucks. And very first day at work, I had to go to Toronto and swear allegiance to the Queen, because believe it or not, the Queen owned every single vehicle in Canada. And every vehicle I drove didn't need insurance, because it was on the ownership, it said Her Royal Majesty, blah, blah. And I felt so privileged. My first day at work, I was making more money than my father. And it was a good feeling. So I had that job for a few years. Then worked in construction industry. I got a job installing cable TV when it first came out into brand new houses. So my boss was very generous. My boss was also a tremendous alcoholic and smoker, but he went out and gave us a 4-wheel drive truck on our first day of work, and we just had to drive around construction sites and do our business, and did that for a while. But deeply on the inside of me, I never felt happy working for someone else. I felt I needed to work for myself. So I wanted to do something different. And just to remind you, I was the one that had abandoned the Lord, but the Lord had not abandoned me, not in the least. And looking back, I can see how he had his hand on my life. So at the age of 22, I decided I wanted to build sailboats. And I had something in my hands. I couldn't explain it. I didn't realize my grandfather on my father's side was a carpenter in Ottawa area. And I don't know how genetics work, but somehow I could put two pieces of wood together. And I had never built a boat in my life, but I rented a shop and started building wooden sailboats. I don't know how it worked out. So I rented this place. Both papers in Oakville ran a little story about me, because I'm a young punk, starting up this business. And I actually sold 2 boats. And so I was on top of the world, because my family's like, oh, he's like the hero. And but it came to a point of profitability, which unfortunately, after 1 year of being in business, my business made $1. So I decided that I wanted to get out of it. I had a mentor, federal government gave me a mentor for free. And he said, oh, this is great, most people lose money in the first year of business and you made $1. And I'm like, no, it's not good. So I took steps to start closing down the shop and whatnot. But there was a blessing to be had throughout all this. Again, like I said, I don't have many pictures of me, so this is it. But the blessing was I started doing other things to pay the bills and whatnot, and I started making picnic tables. And they sold like hotcakes, because everyone wanted a picnic table, nobody knew how to make one, and I could do custom sizes, and I had a truck, so I could deliver them. So Father's Day was a great day for me. And I also, people would ask me to do some stuff when I was at their house, like, can you fix this door, or can you do this and that? And so started doing home renovations, and then I realized that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a carpenter, so I went to trade school at night. Took the GO train all the way to Castle Loma campus of George Brown, and really honed my skills of learning how to build a house. And I did this for 40 years. I built houses, or I did major renovations, or built additions. Ron's living in one of my projects. Sad thing is, because of the way Oakville's going, almost all my work has been torn down. Because people buy a $2 million house and tear it down, right? Case in hand would be across the street here. But there are still, every house I've built from scratch is still standing, so I'm kind of happy for that. And I worked mostly within a 12-block area, from Trafalgar Road to Chartwell and the lake to the QEW. I just worked like here. I spent 3 years just on Douglas Avenue alone, so it was very fulfilling. You know, it was kind of fun. Switching back to my personal life, in 1983, I met the love of my life, Anne Montenero. We met by accident at a party at Castle Loma, the castle in Toronto. And a mining company had just previously lost their 2 executives. I believe it was the president, CEO, and maybe the CFO. Broke the golden rule: you never put all your executives on one plane. And it was Cape Creek Mines, Christmas, they all flew home together, the plane crashed, they were all killed. So stock in Cape Creek Mine plummeted, and they wanted to keep their employees because they knew they could still, you know, had a mine that was making gold. They knew they could spruce things up, so they rented Castle Loma through a party. And I was invited to this party, not by Anne, but by another girl. Her name was Linda, and we were ski friends. That was all it was we went skiing together. And she phoned me up one day and she said, do I own a suit? And I said, yes. And she goes, well, super fancy party, you have to wear a suit. So I did. And then I ended up a table larger than this, sitting all by myself, because Linda wasn't my girlfriend. Everybody took off to do, you know, the bow, you can pull thing or whatever. I'm all by myself. And my wife's best friend Liz said, hey, you look lonely, come sit at our table. And took one look at my wife, and I knew that was the girl I was going to marry. So I got up the courage to talk to her. I asked her if she was from Quebec, and she said yes. So I'm like, French girl, right? Turns out she wasn't French at all. She was Italian and English, and didn't matter. We fell in love and started dating probably like a week after that. And it was the best thing that ever happened to me. And so I'm saying this as a joke, but it's true. So Anne's mother's advice after meeting me, and I'm quoting her, lose him. And find someone else. So, obviously I didn't make a good first impression. But anyway, I'm glad that my wife didn't take that advice. In November 1984, Anne and I purchased a home in Oakville, not too far from here. Promptly tore it down and built a house for us to live in. During this time, I was installing kitchens for a kitchen company in Oakville to pay the bills. And one day my boss said, I have 2 kitchens for you to build, like a choice. So one is right across the street from where you live, and I'm like, or one is 2 blocks away. So I chose the one 2 blocks away. And during the kitchen installation, the family was super nice to me. They invited me downstairs to the basement where they put up a temporary kitchen and invited me to have dinner with them. And when they had dinner, they prayed before dinner, and their little 7-year-old daughter held my hand while they were praying for dinner, and I'm like, what's going on? Like, well, why would she do that, right? Like, you know, I'm a stranger in their household. I asked them 2 days later, I said, you know, I have to get this project done. I need the money to buy building materials for the house I'm building around the corner. Do you mind if I stay late? And they said, well, you could work late, but we're having a Bible study. And I thought, in my head, I'm like, no one's going to have a Bible study, right? So I said, yeah, no problem. And sure enough, at 7 o'clock, 11 people came into the back room of their house and started a Bible study. And later on that evening, I was lured into that back room with tea and cookies. I saw the leader of the group, who some of you know, Jack Curvin, sitting there with this huge Bible on his knee, and I'm like, I'm out of my comfort zone at this point, right? I'm just like, okay. But the next week, I was invited for the Bible study for the whole thing, and I actually attended. Found myself going and buying a Bible at the bookstore, and I remember phoning up Anne. She was living in Toronto. I said, I don't know what I found, but I found it. You have to come to this Bible study. So third week, she came. The kitchen was done, and the 2 of us sat there and just soaked it all in. And we didn't realize the whole group was praying for us, of course. Right? So maybe within a month, both of us gave our hearts to the Lord, and we started. They said, "Do you want to come to our church?" I said, "Sure. Where is it?" And this church. So, and I'll throw out the name Wayne and Caroline Stevens, and they had attended this church like 35 years ago. So we started to come to this church, and we've been coming here ever since. So going back to my friends and their impact on my life, obviously the church had an effect as well, but I met 2 great friends. One was Ross McDonald, who was our youth pastor, and he taught me through by going on mission trips with the kids and ski trips and Muskoka Woods trips, everything like that. Just how to love people unconditionally. And then when Ross McDonald became a regular pastor, we had a new youth pastor show up. His name was David Morrison. And he taught me how to go and above and beyond my self-imposed limitations. And I'll explain that in a minute. So now I'm going to take you to a little trip in Africa. So, one second, I didn't think of it. Sometimes you can have miscommunications with your wife. So my wife, we purchased a property on a lake up in Bruce Peninsula, and she's like, "Oh, I want a house up there." So I built a 2,000 square foot house. So it was, reasonably nice. And I thought we were moving there. And my wife's like, "No, I just want it for 2 weeks of the year." So Adrian helped build this place, so it's me. He came up. And
wait, let me just be clear. I stayed at the staircase. That's all you trusted me.
You got a snake, I think.
So anyway, we had this for a few years, but I just realized it was pointless. Like we sold it, and because I'm not maintaining a house for 2 weeks of the year. So okay, off to Africa. So believe it or not, on the same street, Balsam Drive, I'm just walking the dog, and David Morrison drives up in his car. He gets out of his car and he's talking to me. And he says, "I'm selling everything, giving everything away, and I'm moving my family to Malawi, Africa." And my first words out of my mouth is, "What is Plan B?" And he's like, "No Plan B. We're moving there, we're going to start up an orphanage and a Bible college." More words came out of my mouth. "If you ever move to Africa, call me, I'll come build a house for you." So, about 5 months later, I received this I'm done with the notes, this scratchy phone call. And I'm like, "Hello," he's like, "It's David." And I'm like, the classical, "David who?" He's like, "You promised to build a house for me." And I had not mentioned a word to my wife. I had never thought about it again, period. And all I could think about was how hot it was. I said, "When is it the coolest?" He goes, "April is our winter." I said, "I'm coming in April." So I had to come, I had to go to my wife and like, "Sorry, but I promised David Morrison I'd come to build a house for him in Malawi." So she was all for it. She's like, "Well, you have to go." Right? And our church gave me $40,000, didn't give it to me, gave it to David, to build a house, which was pretty much to the penny how much it costs to build a house in Malawi. And so I'm gonna feel like an old person. I hate this. I'm gonna point with my cane. I'm sorry. This is the house that I built for David Morrison. And the place has tripled in size since this photo was taken. A missionary took this photo with his airplane. Sorry, I'll get out of the way. But I was there. I don't know why it's doing this. Sorry. I took my pills already before I came here. So that's my pill reminder. Took 6.5 weeks to build that house. And I kind of lost a pound a day just by sweat. So I came home 35 pounds lighter. And it was quite the challenge. Many of these buildings were not built when we built David Morrison's house, and he didn't have the security fence going around it, and he didn't have the guardhouse here. So when we went there, it was just an open field that I can liken it to the Florida swamplands that were sold. Like when they sold David Morrison the 99-year lease to that property, they're like, "Sucker." Like, they wanted that property gone, and the chief, got a bunch of money for it. Because it's where all the thieves hung out, And now since the Morrisons have moved there, it's now the most desirable area to live. And many, many people have built their house using that wall as the back wall of their house. Because they know that every 20 minutes a security guard walks around the inside of that property, right? But for those of us staying there now, it's the worst thing because they all have chickens. 4 o'clock in the morning, people know. The chickens are growing away. Anyway, so I built that house, and I'm just scanning the room. Some people came with me that were very hard to deal, like, you know, to get along with, right? And I came home 35 pounds lighter, but I swore I was never going back to Africa again. Too much. And, you know, we're still friends to this day, but I was tried to my maximum. Keep everybody happy, sort of thing. But then 2 years later, I had this dream, and it's the most prophetic dream I've ever had in my life. I had fallen asleep on the couch in my back room, and in this dream, a piece of paper had floated down from heaven. I don't know where it came from. And it landed on my coffee table, and I looked at this piece of paper, and I memorized it. And it was a blueprint for a fourplex. And, am I over time already?
Keep going.
Keep going.
Don't worry. Forget that.
Anyway,
Your time got extended.
in the morning, I drew out that plan exactly on my kitchen table, and it was a fourplex with a prayer room in the middle. So it was accommodation for missionaries to go and stay there on a permanent basis. And so I brought that to another men's group. Later on that week, we met at Jeff Hageman's house in Waterdown, and I pulled out this piece of paper. And they're like, how much do you think that's going to cost? And I'm like, well, probably the same as what Morrison's house costs, $40,000. And right away, like, one guy goes, I'm good for 10. I'm good for 10. Raised $40,000 in less than a minute. And it was just like, whoa. So I scanned it, which was back in those days, leading edge technology. Sent it to David Morrison. He's like, come and build it, right? So I went back and built the fourplex, again, the old man syndrome. But that is the fourplex right there. And that went a lot more smoothly because we learned a few things about building David Morrison's house. So wages in Malawi are $1 American a day, which is 300 kwacha. And we hired like 40 people, and we just hired way too many people. So for that project, we hired like 8 people, and it just went a lot faster. So we got the fourplex with the prayer room built. And I ended up going back to Malawi 6 times in total. Right? So it became a pleasure. It just became my second home kind of deal. And so, if you know anything about me, but I've changed my eating habits. I love donuts. So you can't have a donut in an orphanage or a children's home unless everyone has a donut. So this woman here, a second from the left, her name's Mama Rose, and she makes a really good donut. So I would give her a pile of cash, and she would take her bicycle. She's crippled by polio, so she has a bicycle that she cranes with her hands. And she would make donuts for everybody on the base, because that's how you can't eat a donut in front of a child, right? So everyone had donuts, and I'll speed up now. And then, of course, you need materials. Well, in Malawi, there's no gas station. There's no gas, and there's no money. So why have an engine in your truck? So, like this truck, believe it or not, it's been full of bricks, and there's like 20 people pushing it, and you have to pay every pusher, right? But that's how you get your stuff delivered until we met Sydney, who owned a truck that had gas. But that was the town delivery truck, right? Pretty cute. This is kind of going backwards a bit. This is a roof truss for David Morrison's house. It's actually 40 feet long. And there was a few of us building it. And these kids would come over after school and help hammer the gusset plates in, because you had to put maybe 6 or 7 nails in each plate. And they would work for free just for the joy of hanging out with us, and it was a joy for us to hang out with them. And the guards came up to me one day, they're like, we're gonna take these children away and beat them. Oh. And they're like, well, they might steal a hammer. They're not gonna steal a hammer. So we actually became good friends with the kids. They lived at a neighboring orphanage, and they just didn't have anything to occupy their time. And anytime they could speak to someone with English, you know, they were way, way, way better off, right? So now we had a little fun with wet concrete. So that's the foundation of David Morrison's house. So we all put our name in there. It's there forever. Now, David was all about the children. So he said, you know, I want to come up with something creative to build a children's activity center. This is like in my spare time, right? And 45 degrees hot. So a woman on Watson Avenue, which is like 4 blocks away from here, threw out that slide. Just threw it in the garbage. And so I took it to the car wash and I sprayed it down. And the next container going to Africa, threw it in at the very, very top. There was a little bit of room at the top. And I built Noah's Ark, Paul Craig style. And I couldn't find the picture of the whole ark, but it was a 2-story ark, and at the top was a bicycle wheel that was the steering wheel, and there was a little piece of plywood with a button on it to say, Dove Release button. And we put a swing on the side of it, and the kids were swinging on it too. But it actually looked like a boat, believe it or not. It looked like a boat. And I can sort of tell by these pictures that it was only half done when it was done. It had a beautiful thatched roof. So like, these kids had no fear. They would climb up the pole, like, I don't say like a monkey, but like a monkey, and hang up there in the shade, you know. It was just like such a cool place for them to hang out. Now, being asked to go above my realms of capability, David said, it's so hot here, we need a concrete swimming pool. And I had never built a concrete swimming pool in my whole life. But I said, okay. And I went to a company called Betts Pools. They make $100,000 pools in the area. And I dropped a couple names, and I told them what I was up to. And they invited me to their huge office in Toronto and trained me how to make a concrete pool how they used to do it in the 50s, before they had guns that sprayed cement. And Betts Pool, so we had to give them a little advertising. that sign, I actually had to cut it in half to bring it with me because I had so much stuff to bring with me on that trip. So, Adrian, do you mind going back to the hole? So this hole was dug by one man and one helper. And the poor man had just lost his wife and child. I'm not sure how. Malaria, I think. And so this was his grieving project, was to go a pool. He dug the whole hole by hand. And okay. And then next we had all this rerod that you see here was all bent by me, every single piece. And we had a welder come and weld it together. And there's just a cute story about this welder. So he's welding and welding and welding and welding. And he came from the town, right? So we hired him, and he brought his own welder. And after lunch, he was still welding. I said, why didn't you go for lunch? He goes, oh, I didn't know that lunch was for me. Because they sort of feed everybody en masse, you know, in the giant kitchen. So I ordered room service to bring over a lunch just for him, so he could take a break and have some food. And this was the most trying day of my life because we now had the concrete form around it. We had all the rerod, and this was showtime. So we had to pour the concrete, and it had to turn out perfect. And if it didn't turn out perfect, my whole trip was a waste. Like, we would have had to just fill it in, right? So I had to teach the construction workers, as I had been taught, don't trowel sideways, you have to trowel up. So they would dump the concrete and it would fall down the re-rod to the bottom, and then they had to trowel the rods up to keep, just until it started to dry. And we had two groups of people mixing cement, and they made cement all day. And here's where I started to sweat, and I was bailed out by someone that didn't speak English, someone that only spoke Chichewa. Because, that school has never told me this. There's so much concrete on the walls started to cave in. Right? So these guys said, hey, we know how to fix that. So they put these boards temporary just to hold the walls in place until the walls dried. And I was so relieved because I was sweating. We worked into the night because we had to keep drawing because we had one shot to make this. Right? Yeah, they're there just drawing and making the bottom. Now, believe it or not, you need to have 2 drains in a pool nowadays because someone drowned because they sat on, to be funny, this kid sat on a drain and it sucked him underwater and he couldn't get back up. So now you have to have 2 drains. You'd have to have two people sitting on them to drown. So hopefully not that. Believe it or not, all of this equipment came with me on the flight. So I heated up the pipe and I put it in this giant hockey bag. And this is the skim filter piece. And I taped a handle onto it and I pretended that was my carry-on. And I had people at the JFK airport asking me, what is that? What is that? I'm like, well, if you make a donation to the poor little children in Malawi, I'll tell you. Anyway, I took a tip from the Poisonwood Bible. So I wore on the flight a winter coat, and I had all my underwear and socks and shirts and everything stacked. I was like, and they let me on the plane. Well, I had all that stuff. Okay, so a treat. Got a treat room. So I'm making this up. But this is actually a delicacy, is rats. And so what they do is, some kids at one end of the field with nets, and then kids at the other end of the field light it on fire, and all the rats run away from the fire into the nets, and then they bite you. And it's supposed to be the best delicacy, and I will not eat a rat. And there's a reward for snakes, and I'm not sure if it's maybe Adrian can know. It might be a black mamba, but I just don't know. But you can see it's got a number of machete marks in it. And the guards get an extra portion of porridge in the morning if they catch a snake. So I had one guy came to me, the snake was full of eggs. He goes, well, this is actually good for 5 portions of extra because there's like, look at the eggs. And a comical fact was, we always had these flashlights as walking around looking for these black mamba snakes. And we never saw one. And so we're walking into a village and they're screaming at us, black mamba, and everybody's head in our group goes up. I'm like, why are you looking up? And they're like, black mambas hang out in the trees and they drop on you. That's how they catch you. And we spent 7 years looking for them. And I think it's my last slide?
Yes.
So, so many children are just so blessed. And I'm way out of time. But anyway, that's my sort of adventures. And that has affected my life so much that I've seen miracles happen. And people with absolutely nothing, living in a mud house with a thatch roof that they know is going to get washed away during the storms. And they're just going to rebuild it again. And they're such loving people, right? And I don't know what to do. So anyway, I thought it was gonna be way short. That's pretty much it. I do wanna talk about my health. I'll make it super quick.
We want to hear about it.
So,
Take it back.
anyway. I think I still have that shirt. Anyway, so February 19th, I had a heart attack, and I was sitting in the back room of my house, and I knew I was having a heart attack because my heart felt like it was here. It was like going like that, right? And a guy down the street, Ben Brandt, I just had a heart attack, so he told me everything to do, right? So I yelled at my wife. I said, I'm having a heart attack, you have to call 911. I grabbed the other phone and called the church. I'm having a heart attack, I need prayer. So, anyway, we had two sources of healing involved. I ran to my bathroom, I took 2 aspirin. And now the new rules for heart attack is you sit by the front, you unlock your front door so they don't have to break it down, and you sit by the front door so they know where you are. So, fire truck, 9 firefighters in my kitchen. And, but I managed to walk outside at 10 o'clock at night, I was in my underwear, and get on the stretcher. And that's it, that's all I can remember. And even Anne had to help me remember that kind of part of it. 15 minutes, the ambulance people tried to test my blood to see if I was having a heart attack or not. So 15 minutes that ambulance sat in my driveway. Because they didn't know what hospital to take me to, right? So the truck finally got it in. My neighbors heard me screaming, and I read in the doctor's report that I was combative to the ambulance attendants. So whatever I was doing, I was making it very difficult for them to do their jobs. Got taken to Mississauga. I had the widowmaker heart attack, 100% blockage of the vein that supplies blood to my heart. And luckily I don't know if this played an effect or not, but luckily my daughter's critical care nurse, she phoned the hospital, her friend, and it's like, my dad's coming. So, this guy named Dr. Bob Singh was already waiting for me to come, put it wherever they did it, took the blockage out and put in a stint, and that saved my life. But what they couldn't repair was 15 minutes without oxygen. I basically should have been brain dead, basically. And anyway, and my heart was damaged beyond repair. So my heart didn't want to pump. They were having all sorts of troubles with me. So they cut my aorta and put another pump inside my heart, and I lived on that pump for 4 days. And it did the pumping, and it just let my heart relax. And we believe I went by helicopter from Mississauga to Toronto General Hospital. There I accidentally threw up and inhaled my vomit, which is called aspiration. And I had aspiration pneumonia, which is very bad, and I caught sepsis. And then I went into shock. And then I died twice, and both times they had to revive me with paddles. But one of those times, so I'm in a dream world, right? I have no idea what's going on. One of those times I saw the bright light of heaven. And I wasn't ready to go there. Like everyone says, run towards the bright light, run to, I just wanted to be with my family. So I guess when they revived me, that all faded away, and I didn't regain consciousness, but I came back to life. And but twice they had to revive me. Oh, and something else happened. Anyway, I was at Toronto General for a while, and then they sent me back to Mississauga, and then Mississauga sent me to Oakville. So I was in a coma for 30 days, and I remember waking up, and first person I saw was my wife. And I'm like, why is your head sideways? And she's like, because your head is sideways. So, and we talked a little bit, and then I saw my daughter, and I asked a bunch of idiotic questions like, why are we here, and who's sick? Stuff like that. And I started to ask for grapes because I was so thirsty, right? I had all these tubes in my mouth that were keeping me alive. And so anyway, 30 days in a coma, but I woke up paralyzed. Couldn't move a finger or anything like that. So they took the tubes out of my mouth and put them in my neck so I could talk. I don't know how I was talking to my daughter. But anyway, they taught me how to use my hands again, how to feed myself, brush my teeth. And then came the time to walking. And I was terrified to get out of that bed. I was like, I'm gonna fall and I'm gonna hit that concrete. And there's two mature women, physiotherapists, they're like, you're not gonna fall, you're just going to come lean forward and we'll grab you, right? And I'm crying. And it was all I could do to stand for like 2 seconds, and then I had to go back. But anyway, 4 months at the hospital, they taught me how to walk again, how to do stairs, how to use a walker, all that kind of stuff, right? So I got sent home on a walker. And during that time, I had 2 cardiologists. And the first cardiologist, the only question I could ask him is, am I at danger of having another heart attack? He goes, oh no, you're at danger of sudden death. I can see that out of my daughter. I was like, great. So, second cardiologist, my wife was with me, and I said, how much longer do I have to live? He goes, oh, I hate to make a prediction over 2 weeks. And so he said that in front of my wife, and I'm like, can these guys not say anything positive? So then that was 14 months ago. So the joke's on them kind of deal. So I have been told that my heart is in the toilet. I need a new one. So I was supposed to find out this Thursday if I qualified for the heart transplant list, which is only the list. And they had an emergency. My daughter feels there was a motorcycle accident, and she feels they were busy giving someone else a heart. So next Thursday, I was supposed to hear if I make it to the heart transplant list. But the good news is they do 37 heart transplants a year at Toronto General, and I'll be number 27 on the list. So I just have to live to see that day. And it's a big mathematical scheme. Heart has to be right size, right blood type, my size, body mass index, all that kind of stuff, right? So it could be on the list one day, or it could be on the list 300 days, I don't know. But it looks just darn good, and the Lord gave me a dream that I was told yes, even though I haven't been told yes. So that was comforting to me. And now I'm walking with a cane. So health-wise, I think everything's really good. I go to my group every Tuesday, and we've gone from panic mode at my house to relaxing. So yeah, so everything's good. And I know so many people in this room have been praying for me, and I thank you for that. And I think that's my story.